talked about autopilot, and I feel like there's a lot that's alive in our context these days. We're still continuing to live through a pandemic. I don't feel like it's over for everyone. And I think about, how we navigate when our cup is like maybe not even half full, but maybe empty. And I think that also lends, if I think about my own experience about when I have been in autopilot, what are some ways that we may all have intentions about how we want to show up in the world, but when we're depleted, we're not feeling resourced. I find that that's where those autopilot moments happen. What are some practices that you use personally to help bring you back to the moment? And I'm also mindful there's some great tips in the podcast, so I don't want to give that all away. But for our viewers to understand that, to make this accessible and tangible.
Yeah, I have so much to share. I'm trying to figure out how to share it within the time that we have. I think the biggest thing is the self-awareness and the tools that I use. I mean, people can use different things. If journaling works for you, you can journal. If talking to a safe person works for you, even just separating yourself from the moment and trying to look at your life as an observer. I find it's really helpful for me to look at my personal values. So what is it that is really important to me, and what is it that I need? Or to be honest about my circumstance, right? Sometimes you're in a circumstance where you have to take a job that you don't like, but you need to put food on the table, right? So being aware of what your circumstances are, what your intentions are, what your goals are, these are all tools that I use to help me make decisions that are a little bit more deliberate, so that I can say, okay, you know what, I pulled back on my career because my kids are young and I'm pregnant and I'm breastfeeding, whatever it is that I'm doing, and I'm pulling back on my career, but I have the intention to continue my career, or I have the intention. So I know that that is going to be, I think, less regretful, less resentful. And this may even be controversial by saying that sometimes people feel that emotion when they're having kids, because kids should be your be all and end all. Many people think that, but we are entire people. We have our own goals, we have our own dreams, and so being really intentional about what those dreams are, what those goals are, what those interests are. Even if you never want to go back to work again, what do we feel like we need out of life? And so I really try to experiment with that in my life, and I try to really be clear about what those things are and what takes me forward and what holds me back.
Wow, so much there. And I really hear that idea of being rooted in our purpose and almost our why, right? Around, like, part of how we show up intentionally is about having those conversations with ourselves first and foremost about what is that. And I can imagine, like, for you, as you've talked about that, in our maybe offline conversations around, you're in a bit of a transformation space, or you're transitioning in your own life. And I always say, sometimes we don't give enough time and consideration to, like, the impact of transitions, right? Even you talked about, like, taking a new job or whatever that is. Sometimes we're just like, yep, we're in our heads about it and we just go through it. But giving ourselves, I say, like, I think about two things: pause and permission. And pause is about just, like, taking that moment to check in and go, okay, I know in my head why I'm doing it, but what's the message coming from my body, my spirit, like, is, and just learning to listen to that. Because I think if you've survived by not listening to that, to shift that, to actually make space, is a process. And then the permission is that idea of, I think for a long time in my own life, I think I was subconsciously waiting for somebody to give me permission to listen, which might not sound very intuitive, but I think, again, when you talk about the culture that we came up in, where I think there's a collectivist focus, not so much individualistic. And I'm not saying it's nothing I'm offering as a criticism. I'm really grateful for the ancestry that I come from, that we come from, and there's so much wisdom there. But how much of the way we showed up was about surviving versus thriving? And what a privilege to even be in this moment where we can focus on thriving. Those are some things that I think of. And like, this idea that every no is a deeper yes to something else.